In today's video, we have the latest NHL trade rumors from around the league. We're looking at an update on the Mark Scheifele situation in Winnipeg. We have a couple of big-name defensemen in the rumor mill in San Jose, including Erik Karlsson and Brent. Plus, are the Vancouver Canucks preparing for a RFA offer sheet acquisition this summer? We'll discuss that potential as well. Plus, we have the latest update from the playoffs, some more prospect signings, and some more fines from player safety. And that's coming up next. Welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a variety of NHL news and some trade rumors to take a look at here today. First up, a couple of fines from player safety based on last night's NHL playoff action. We saw a fine for Jamie Benn in the Dallas Stars Calgary Flames game last night. He was fined $5,000 for high sticking against Flames forward Andrew Mangiapane. Mangiapane was essentially kind of against the back of the net, and he kind of high sticked him basically through the net. So he gets $5,000, which is the maximum allowable under the CBA. And Evgeny Kuznetsov in Washington in that Florida Capitals game also got a fine for high sticking as well against Panthers forward Noel Acciari. Now, with the playoff updates, we saw some interesting results. Obviously, a few teams that are really high ranked based on their regular season results are kind of in trouble here. The Washington Capitals took a 2-1 series lead against Florida, and it wasn't even close with a 6-1 victory. Ilya Samsonov played between the pipes for Washington. Florida scored early with Jonathan Huberdeau, and it was all Capitals from there. Certainly, Washington had their fair share of chances they gave to Florida, but they were able to shut down the Panthers' attack and take a big victory for a 2-1 series lead. So we'll have to see Florida bounce back. I know it was already talked about their level of compete, their level of kind of killer instinct, finishing checks, etc., kind of being the main thing they need to focus on as we head into Game 4, trying to tie this series up. The Avalanche took a commanding 3-0 series lead over the Predators with a 7-3 victory. Obviously, again, the Avalanche attack has proven to be a little bit much. Connor Ingram, I think, has still done a relatively good job between the pipes for Nashville, giving them a chance, but they're not getting enough out of their top stars. Like, for example, Philip Forsberg hasn't really done much of anything in this series, and it's just too much. I think the Avalanche are going to steamroll here, maybe wrap this up in 4. We'll see if the Predators can stay alive and at least force a Game 5. The Penguins took a 2-1 series lead over the New York Rangers. Now, I know the odds makers, many of which favored the Penguins slightly in this series before it began. I know, but a lot of people, myself included, thought the Rangers would win, and it's still possible. But after the game yesterday, the Penguins now have a 2-1 series lead, which is not exactly what we expected here, but the Penguins and Crosby, Malkin, and Letang have proven here time and time again they just will not go away. They had to, obviously blew a lead yesterday. They had a 4-1 lead. At one point, the Rangers came back, tied it up. The Penguins scored late to take a 5-4 lead, and the last couple were empty net goals to kind of seal things up. So even though it's a 7-4 game, it was really a 5-4 game with a couple empty net ones. So it's not really as lopsided as it might seem. The Rangers dominated large parts of that game as well. Louis Domingue obviously was in goal. Tristan Jarry was starting to skate for Pittsburgh, but no exact timetable when he'll be in there. We saw Igor Shesterkin get yanked for the Rangers, which is something that was the first time we've seen that happen here. So we'll see where the series goes next, if the Rangers can get things tied up before they head into game number 5. Now, the Dallas Stars also took a surprising 2-1 series lead over the Flames last night with a 4-2 victory. Calgary is in a little bit of trouble here. Early on, they're not doing anything at 5-on-5. Dallas is shutting them down. Jake Ottinger has been phenomenal, arguably the best goalie in the playoffs so far. And Dallas is, even though they're not getting a ton of scoring outside of their top guys, which is what we kind of a lot of people justified in saying that the Flames would likely win this series in 4 or 5, because Dallas was not getting much in the way of scoring outside of, maybe 3 or 4 players, and they were going to need a lot more depth scoring to have any success, and they haven't really had that. They did get a goal from Radek Faksa yesterday, which is his first in a while, first of the playoffs, but, you're getting your usual suspects. Hintz, Pavelski, Robertson are the main guys driving the offense, but at the same time, they're just shutting the Flames down. Matthew Tkachuk and Johnny Gaudreau has not done much of anything. Gaudreau, again, has had a phenomenal regular season, and so far, at least, it's early, and there's still time, but it's not really showing up in the playoffs. I mean, he's had a few good plays. He did set up one of the goals yesterday, the Lindholm goal. But, for the most part, like they seem to be more concerned over the rough stuff. I mean, Matthew Tkachuk went at Klingberg again early in that game. I think it's time to kind of put that to rest and focus on scoring some goals and taking this series back tied up here, because the Flames could end up in trouble if they continue to get stymied here by Jake Ottinger and are not able to score at even strength, because that's where things are really lacking here today. And of course, in today's early game, which is going on as I record this video, the Bruins and the Carolina Hurricanes. The Bruins were leading 4-2 at the time of the recording of this, so we'll see where that ends. But Charlie McAvoy, with the bigger story, is out due to COVID-19 protocol. So obviously that tells us he's tested positive. And with the current protocols in the NHL, they're supposed to be out for 5 days from the onset of symptoms. So that's certainly not good news. They're already without Hampus Lindholm. I guess there is a possibility Lindholm might be back next game. But with 5 days being out, McAvoy is going to miss a fair bit of time here. So this is not good news for Boston, but they keep finding ways to carry the series on. If they hang on for a victory, because it is in the third period right now as I record this, the series will be tied 2-2, heading to Carolina for Game 5. So we'll see where it goes, but McAvoy is going to be out for some time. Hopefully for the Bruins' sake, Lindholm can make it back here shortly. That'll help them, but they're certainly fighting to fight another day here, even without their top two defensemen in their lineup. Now, of course, we saw a few more prospect signings here today as well. The Rangers have signed 21-year-old Adam Edstrom, who's a 2019 6th-round pick. He's a huge center iceman, 6'6", out of Sweden. So he gets his entry-level contract. Will make the jump to North America to join the Rangers organization and see where he slots into their system next year. Obviously, between the minor pro levels, likely at the AHL levels, where we're going to see him first. And the Seattle Kraken have also signed a very interesting defensive prospect. He's a 21-year-old from Finland, Petro Sepala, who's a left shot, 6'2", Finnish defenseman who was not drafted. He's an undrafted guy, 21 years old as well, same as the Ranger prospect, and he gets his entry-level contract here as well. So we'll see where that goes and if he turns out to be a player for them or not. But we're going to see the Seattle Kraken likely sign more prospects and some, whether it be players from college or Europe, etc., because they are going to have their own full rostered AHL team next season. So they're going to need a few more players to fill up the depth of the organization in that regard. So we'll see what else they do. Moving on to the trade rumors section of the video. A lot of this information comes from, actually all of it, from the 32 Thoughts segment last night on Hockey Night in Canada with Elliot Friedman and Jeff Merrick. Some new information. Of course, we talked a lot about the fact that Mark Scheifele is a player who was quite likely to be traded this offseason. There was some speculation on whether or not he wanted to be traded or not. The word had leaked out back a few weeks at least before the end of the regular season that even though Scheifele had not officially requested a trade, it was believed that he would be open and welcoming it if one came about to get him a fresh start to carry on his career elsewhere, where he was feeling like, because we all heard him at the end of the season media availability, saying that he feels he's in the prime of his career, he likes where his game is at, and he wants to be able to have a chance to win, and he was going to have what he referred to as a tough conversation with management as he did the exit interviews that he always do at the end of the season. And, he said he'd be having some tough conversations with Kevin Cheveldayoff. Now, from what we're saying and hearing now, Scheifele during that time did not officially request a trade yet again. So that's, I guess, for Jets fans who would like to see him stick around, good news. But at the same time, it does not necessarily mean that we will not see a trade. I think Winnipeg has to consider a variety of things here. For one, not core group of players that have been there for a long time and not really advancing themselves. I think it's fair to say that they hopefully acknowledge that they need to change things up in some regard. So obviously, when you don't succeed, change comes. So he could be a part of that change. Obviously, 29 years old with a couple years left on his contract, it's over $6 million. Like, he'd be an attractive option as a right shot center who can score for a lot of teams. So there's no doubt the interest would be high. They'd get a good return, etc. Plus, you have to think, with the comments made by other players, including Paul Stastny at the end of season, it kind of made it sound like there was a bit of an issue in that locker room in that he might be part of the problem. At least that's how some of the other players appeared to feel. Of course, they didn't come out and name Scheifele, but the way Stastny was talking about players not caring for their teammates, not caring about the team as a whole, and more concerned with their own individual play, just the way he was talking, it just made it feel and sound like he was referring to Scheifele, which is what a lot of people kind of took away from that. Doesn't mean 100% that he was, but after hearing Mark Scheifele's remarks himself at the same time, media availability at the end of season, and it was just all about him. Me. It wasn't about the team. So you kind of piece it all together, and you wonder if there is a bit of a locker room rift and maybe a culture issue, and some of that might need to change. So I wouldn't be shocked if Scheifele is still traded. We'll see. He doesn't have the trade protection in his contract to prevent that from happening. And obviously, at this point in time, Winnipeg needs changes. So even though he hasn't requested it, I think it's fair to say that the situation's kind of still the same. I don't think he'd be completely opposed and upset if he was dealt and ended up getting a fresh start somewhere else with a chance to hopefully win a Stanley Cup somewhere. Now, of course, are the Vancouver Canucks preparing for an offer sheet target? And it's certainly something that Jeff Marek talked about, which was a little bit surprising, but somewhat kind of makes sense here. Basically, he went on to say that when they traded Travis Hamonic to the Ottawa Senators at the NHL trade deadline, they received a third-round pick. Well, that third-round pick was actually their very own third-round pick. It's kind of made its way around through a few teams and back to Vancouver. Of course, they originally traded that pick in the Nate Schmidt trade. It went with Schmidt to the Winnipeg Jets, and then the trade later went to Ottawa in a separate trade, and now it's made its way back to Vancouver through the Hamonic deal. So essentially what Marek was talking about was to make an offer sheet, you have to use your own draft picks. If you're whatever level of compensation that's going to be required, if it's successful, has to be your own picks. You can't say, well, we got a second round pick from this team and a fourth round pick from that team, a first rounder from that team. Like, you can't just acquire picks from other places. It has to be your own. So with that being said, looking at the tiers of RFA contracts and what the offer sheets would bring back for compensation, a lot of the there's a lot of players that would fall into that first and third as compensation category, not $5 to $7 million range or something to that effect. Well, obviously, we'll have to wait and see what the NHL puts out for numbers, because it changes every year on what the tiers of compensation are and based on what the results are. But the highest one usually being like 4 first-round picks, which I believe in the most recent year, I think it was around $10.5 or $11 million was the highest level of compensation for first rounders, and it just drops and goes from there. So depending on the contract that they sign, depends on the level of compensation that you give up if it's indeed successful. Of course, Kevin Fiala is a name that's been out there, talked about by a variety of teams. Like, if Minnesota does want to trade him, there's going to be lots of interest, there's no doubt. But we know that the Minnesota Wild are going to be facing a salary cap crunch, and if you're going to consider using the offer sheet as a tool in your toolbox to go after a young player that you're fond of and want to acquire, the Minnesota Wild would unfortunately be a prime target right now based on that situation. Like, ideally, to be successful, you either have to overpay, like we saw with the Jesperi Kotkaniemi situation in Carolina. I think Carolina knew that they were getting a player that they were not going to, Montreal was unlikely to match, given that they were not going to want that contract. But at the same time, you don't have to necessarily do a long-term deal on an offer sheet. It can be a really rich 1 or 2 year deal, something shorter term, and then you sign them afterwards for a more reasonable amount just to pry them away, which is what Carolina did. And now we have a longer term contract in place for much less than what the offer sheet was for, right? So it is a strategy you can employ to be successful, and the Canucks just might be doing that. I mean, it doesn't mean for sure that they will, but as Marek said, they're trying to make sure they have as many tools in their toolbox as possible, and certainly wouldn't rule it out. It doesn't mean for sure it's Fiala either, because obviously his price tag is already fairly high. Minnesota's leading the Blues in their series 2-1. We don't know how deep of a run Minnesota's going to go on. The more they go further in the playoffs and the more points he puts up, it's just going to continue to jack up his price after an 85-point season. So we will see where things go, but we know that he and the Wild have had a very contentious negotiation last year. We know the Wild are tight on space, and we know that other teams are likely looking at him as a prime target, whether it be offer sheet, trade, etc., to make an acquisition at an impactful young player to their roster right away. Now, a couple of the names that came up in this segment that was not too shocking in a sense, but names we have not heard. Brand new material here in the rumor mill from the San Jose Sharks, with Marek and Friedman talking about the fact that the San Jose Sharks are exploring the possibility of trading one of their big-time right-shot defensemen that are both heavily paid, between Erik Karlsson and Brent Burns, citing a couple of reasons. One, as they go into it, hiring a new GM, that they're not going to want to go into a rebuild mode. They made it clear that they intend to do everything they can to contend, but probably at least a retool, so to speak, would be helpful. And to do that, some salary cap space would be much helpful to make that process go a little bit smoother. And they found having two big-time right-shot defensemen that both thrive on having a lot of minutes to play, power play opportunities, etc. It's just not working out the way they expected, which is essentially why when Karlsson was in the process of being traded out of Ottawa, I know myself, I did not expect the Sharks to be a prime acquisition team in that regard. I was really surprised when it turned out to be San Jose. I mean, at the end of the day here, they already had Brent Burns, and they already had a lot of money invested in that blue line, and then they get Karlsson, and they sign him to a long-term deal at $11.5 million cap hit per season. Well, that's a mega hit. Karlsson took a long time to adjust, has struggled with injuries, and it's just not the same. And, it's a big difference between East Coast, West Coast, major adjustment in that sense. But then, like I said, he's battled injuries. It's not the same kind of role for him, and it just has not worked out. Now, in the case of both of these players, though, they will be challenging to trade. There's no doubt. And San Jose might have to eat some money on this or have a third-party broker do it if they have any chance of doing it. Now, a couple of things to keep in mind here. Erik Karlsson's 31 years old. He's soon to be 32 at the end of this month. So before next season starts, he's 32. He'll be 32 in a bit. He'll have 5 years left on his contract with that $11.5 million cap hit. And they gave him a full no-move clause. So to trade Erik Karlsson, you have to have him consent to it no matter where he goes. Now, one big tidbit that might make that more easier to move is this summer he is due a $10 million signing bonus. His breakdown of his payment for 22-23 is a $10 million signing bonus and a $2 million salary. So obviously if they waited until that bonus was paid, that would take a lot of money off of that contract. It would certainly make it more doable at that point. And they'd get him for the coming season at least for $2 million, which would not be all that bad. Now after that, they have 4 more years where he has a $1 million signing bonus and a $10.5 million salary, then another $1 million signing bonus, $10 million salary, $5 million signing bonus, $4 million salary, $6 million signing bonus, and $1.5 million salary. So it's certainly a lot of money that's still left there. I mean, that's, we're getting into over $35 million that would be left after this coming season. Obviously, we're getting, in the high 30s if you add in his $2 million salary. That would be due this year as well. Given his age, if he can get back to playing, he's had flashes here in the last year or two that he's, maybe not the elite player he once was, but still a really good defenseman. If you can get him with salary retained to knock that cap hit down to, I don't know, I guess you're looking at a maximum of 50% would be, I guess, would still be north of around $6 million. You'd have to, if you had a third-party team in there, I guess you could maybe knock it down more. But still, even at $6 million, Karlsson's a lot more affordable. So I don't know. I mean, it's something that we'll have to see. I don't know how he feels about it, but I'm sure if they're exploring some trades, they must have at least had some preliminary conversations. Now, you might argue that Brent Burns might be easier to trade. But here's the thing, he's also got a complicated situation. He's 37 years old, he's got 3 more years left, and he also has a modified no trade. He doesn't have the full no move like Karlsson does, but he has a modified no trade, which really is not that much more flexible because they gave him a 3-team list. That's all he can give as a teams he would accept a trade to, so it's not really a lot. He has a cap hit of $8 million, so it's certainly a little bit more affordable from a eating some salary perspective with 3 years as opposed to 5. He put up 54 points this year, so even though he's older, he's still productive on a not overly successful team. The 3 years remaining on his contract, he's got a $3.5 million bonus and a $3 million salary, $2 million bonus, $3 million salary, and $2 million bonus, $3 million salary. So really, if they paid his $3.5 million bonus this summer, they have him for $3 million this year, and then he'd basically only be making $5 million over the next 2 years each. So that's really not that bad. So to me, the Burns contract is probably easier to trade because it's not such a long-term commitment, and you might not have to eat so much of it to make it happen. If you go to a team that can handle the cap hit, but they're happy with the fact that the cash going out is much lower, then that might be something that some teams would do. But of course, he's likely going to have to agree to it because there's not a lot of teams there that he can be moved to without him consenting to it. So certainly going to be tough. Now, the other thing with the San Jose Sharks, we could see big-time changes on that blue line. It's also heavily rumored that Marc-Edouard Vlasic could be a buyout candidate. Many feel that his contract, which is around $7 million cap hit and has a fair bit of term left on it as well, is not going to be tradable, and that a buyout there we might finally be at a point where they will consider that. Doesn't mean they will for sure, but we could see a buyout there, one of these contracts be traded, and then that would give them a lot more flexibility for their defense and for their overall cap situation to go. But hard to imagine one of these guys not being in San Jose given their contracts and where things have been the last few years. But let me know what your thoughts are on potentially seeing a move out of San Jose, which could send one of their top right shot defensemen elsewhere. Let me know your thoughts on that and everything else discussed today down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to this channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news, rumors, and analysis on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.